Naomi Harris was the kind of person everyone trusted. A devoted single mother, a school counselor, and a loyal friend. On a warm Tuesday night, she left choir practice as usual, but she never made it home. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through the community. Friends searched, family pleaded for answers, and the police began piecing together her final moments. But what started as a missing persons case quickly became something far darker. Naomi wasn't just a friend. She wasn't just a mother. She was carrying a secret that threatened to destroy a man's perfect life. That man wasn't a stranger. He was someone trusted, respected. A church deacon named Elijah Davenport. Over the coming weeks, investigators would uncover the truth. An affair, a pregnancy, and a betrayal so deep it ended in murder. Elijah Davenport had everything to lose, and he was willing to risk it all to protect his secret. Elijah Davenport was the man everyone admired. At 45 years old, he was more than just a church deacon. He was a pillar of his community. People turned to him for guidance, his sermons were filled with conviction, and his reputation as a loving husband and devoted father seemed unshakable. Born and raised in Atlanta's tight-knit church community, Elijah was taught early on that faith and family were everything. He married Angela at the age of 25, and together they became the perfect image of a God-fearing couple. Angela, with her quiet grace, supported Elijah in every way, standing by his side as he rose to prominence in their church. Their home was a gathering place for the congregation, where warmth and fellowship were always on display. But Elijah wasn't as perfect as he appeared. Beneath the polished exterior was a man grappling with insecurities. He had grown tired of the mundane routine of his seemingly ideal life and felt the weight of expectations from his congregation, his family, and himself. These pressures made him vulnerable to temptation, a vulnerability that would set him on a path of no return. Angela Davenport was the heart of her family. At 42, she was the kind of wife and mother who put everyone else's needs before her own. She supported Elijah's demanding role at the church, often organizing events and ensuring their home remained a sanctuary for their community. Her loyalty to her husband was unwavering, and her kindness made her a beloved figure among the congregation. Angela also valued her friendships deeply, especially her bond with Naomi Harris. Naomi wasn't just her best friend, she was like a sister. The two women had shared countless moments of laughter, tears, and secrets over the years. Angela often confided in Naomi about her worries, including the growing emotional distance she felt in her marriage. What Angela didn't know was that Naomi, the woman she trusted the most, was keeping a devastating secret, a secret that would shatter Angela's life forever. Naomi Harris had always been independent. At 38, she was raising a teenage son on her own after a difficult divorce. As a school counselor, she dedicated her life to helping others, and her warm, nurturing personality made her beloved in the community. Despite her strength, Naomi was no stranger to loneliness. Her friendship with Angela gave her a sense of belonging, and she often found comfort in the Davenport household. But over time, Naomi's vulnerability became apparent to someone else, Elijah. His charm and attention filled a void she didn't even realize she had. Naomi didn't intend to betray her friend, but her growing connection with Elijah turned into something she couldn't control. When she discovered she was pregnant, Naomi felt trapped. Torn between her loyalty to Angela and her own needs, she made a choice: to confront Elijah, unaware of the danger that decision would bring. Detective Marcus Coleman wasn't the kind of man to let details slip through the cracks. At 50 years old, he was a veteran investigator who had worked on some of Atlanta's most challenging cases. Known for his sharp instincts and calm demeanor, Marcus had a reputation for uncovering the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. When Naomi Harris went missing, Marcus took on the case. From the start, something about the situation didn't sit right with him. The more he dug, the more inconsistencies he found in the stories told by those closest to Naomi, especially Elijah Davenport. For Marcus, this case was personal. Years of dealing with crimes of passion had taught him that the people you least suspect are often the ones with the most to hide. And as he unraveled the web of lies surrounding Naomi's disappearance, Marcus found himself confronting not just a crime, but the devastating ripple effects of betrayal, power, and broken trust. Naomi Harris had always found comfort in the church. For years, it had been her sanctuary, a place where the weight of single parenthood felt a little lighter. Among the congregation, Elijah Davenport stood out. As a deacon, he had a way of speaking that made everyone feel seen, heard, and valued. Naomi admired him, not just as a spiritual leader, but as a man who seemed to have it all: a loving family, a steady life, and unwavering faith. But appearances could be deceiving. It started innocently enough. During a Bible study session, Naomi lingered behind, waiting for the other members to leave. She approached Elijah, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "Deacon Davenport," she began, "do you ever feel like no matter how hard you try, it's never enough?" Elijah looked up, his expression softening. "More often than you'd think," he replied. That was the first of many conversations, moments where Naomi confided her struggles as a single mother, her feelings of inadequacy, and the loneliness that often kept her awake at night. Elijah listened, offering words of encouragement and quoting scripture to ease her burdens. At first, it was just comforting words and a shoulder to lean on. But soon, the lines blurred. Over the weeks, their interactions became more frequent. Elijah would find reasons to linger after services, knowing Naomi would be there. They began exchanging phone numbers under the guise of discussing church matters. Late at night, when Angela was asleep, Elijah's phone would buzz with a message from Naomi. "Thank you for listening today. I don't know what I'd do without you." Elijah knew it was wrong. But the truth was, he felt underappreciated at home. Angela, though loyal and supportive, had grown distant. Their conversations revolved around schedules, responsibilities, and church events. He missed feeling needed, admired, and important. Naomi filled that void. The first time they met outside of church was after an evening prayer service. Naomi had been quiet that night, her usual warmth replaced with a heaviness Elijah couldn't ignore. "Are you okay?" he asked as they walked to the parking lot. She hesitated before answering, her voice breaking. "It's just, sometimes I feel like I'm failing my son. He deserves more than what I can give." Without thinking, Elijah placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're stronger than you know, Naomi. Don't let doubt steal your joy." That moment lingered, a touch that lasted a second too long. They both felt it, but neither acknowledged it. As time went on, their connection deepened. Casual conversations turned into emotionally charged exchanges. They began meeting in secluded spots, away from prying eyes. What started as innocent support had become something much more dangerous. Elijah justified his actions by telling himself he was simply helping a friend in need. But deep down, he knew better. Naomi, too, wrestled with guilt. She loved Angela like a sister, but her loneliness and Elijah's attention felt intoxicating. The first kiss happened after a church fundraiser. It was late and the parking lot was empty. Naomi was gathering her things when Elijah leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're incredible, Naomi. I hope you know that." Before she could respond, he kissed her. It was brief, hesitant, but it changed everything. From that moment on, they were no longer just two people seeking solace. They were two people entangled in a web of secrecy and desire. Elijah and Naomi became adept at hiding their growing relationship. They avoided prolonged conversations in public and kept their interactions strictly professional during church events. But behind closed doors, their connection grew stronger. They began texting each other late into the night, sharing parts of themselves they hadn't shared with anyone else. Naomi would tell him about her dreams of giving her son a better life. Elijah would confide in her about his frustrations with the pressures of being a deacon and a husband. Each message, each secret meeting, brought them closer to a breaking point. It was a quiet evening at the church. Most of the congregation had left, but Naomi stayed behind, pacing in the empty sanctuary. Her hands trembled as she clutched a small envelope, the results of a pregnancy test. When Elijah entered, he immediately noticed her distress. "Naomi, what's wrong?" he asked, concern etched on his face. She turned to him, her eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. "I'm pregnant, Elijah." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Elijah's mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't part of the plan. This couldn't be happening. Naomi stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I need you to be honest with me. What are we going to do?" Elijah's initial reaction was panic. He couldn't fathom the idea of losing everything he'd worked so hard to build: his marriage, his position in the church, his reputation. This can't happen, he stammered. Naomi's expression hardened. So what? You're just going to pretend this didn't happen? I won't let you do that, Elijah. I won't let you ruin my life while you go on pretending to be perfect. Elijah tried to reason with her, his voice rising with desperation. Think about what you're saying, Naomi. If this gets out, it'll destroy both of us. But Naomi was resolute. She had spent too long being silent, too long sacrificing her happiness for others. I deserve better than to be your secret, Elijah. And if you won't step up, I'll tell Angela. I'll tell the whole church. Her ultimatum left Elijah paralyzed with fear. He knew she meant every word. If Naomi followed through, his carefully constructed life would crumble. For Elijah Davenport, the days after Naomi's pregnancy revelation became a waking nightmare. Every moment felt like walking a tightrope, where the smallest slip could send his entire life crashing down. It began with the phone calls. Naomi's number would flash on his screen at all hours of the day, her messages growing more insistent. At first, he ignored them, hoping she would calm down, but the silence only seemed to fuel her anger. Pick up the phone, Elijah. One voicemail demanded. We need to talk, or I'll make sure everyone hears the truth. Desperation took hold. Elijah began deleting every message, every call log, and every trace of their communication. He spent hours meticulously combing through his phone, erasing evidence of their connection. But no matter how much he deleted, he couldn't shake the fear that something would slip through the cracks. At home, his behavior grew erratic. He stayed out late, claiming he was visiting sick members of the congregation or attending last-minute church meetings. Angela, always trusting, accepted his excuses without question. But Elijah's paranoia seeped into every corner of his life. He started avoiding Naomi altogether. On Sundays, he would take the long way around the church to avoid crossing paths with her. During Bible study, he deliberately sat at the far end of the table, careful not to make eye contact. But Naomi wasn't making it easy for him. Naomi's patience had run out. She wasn't just angry, she felt betrayed. Elijah had promised her comfort, support, and understanding, but now he was treating her like a mistake he wanted to erase. At first, she tried subtle reminders. During Sunday service, she would linger near him, her presence a silent challenge. After one sermon, she cornered him near the church's back entrance. Her voice was low, but her words cut through him like a blade. You think no one will find out, Elijah? The truth always comes out. Her cryptic hints didn't go unnoticed. Members of the congregation began to whisper, wondering why Naomi always seemed so tense around the deacon. Though no one had any evidence of wrongdoing, Elijah's growing paranoia made him believe they did. Elijah's anxiety turned into obsession. He became hyper-aware of every glance, every whisper, and every seemingly innocent conversation. When Angela mentioned seeing Naomi at the grocery store, Elijah's heart raced. What did she say to you? He asked, his tone sharper than he intended. Angela looked at him, puzzled. Nothing, Elijah. We just talked about the upcoming bake sale. His reaction only made Angela suspicious. Is something going on? She asked. But Elijah brushed it off, forcing a smile and muttering something about church stress. Naomi, meanwhile, began escalating her efforts. She started showing up at his home unannounced, always when Angela wasn't there. One evening, she waited for him in the driveway, her arms crossed and her face set with determination. You can't keep running from me, Elijah, she said, stepping closer to his car as he pulled in. We need to figure this out. Elijah's voice shook as he responded. You need to leave, Naomi. You can't be here. But Naomi didn't back down. You don't get to decide when this ends. You promised me something, and now you're pretending it never happened. I'm not going to let you walk away from this. Her words echoed in his mind long after she drove off. That night, Elijah barely slept. Every creak of the house made him jump, and every shadow outside the window felt like a threat. At church, Naomi's presence became impossible to ignore. She began dropping pointed remarks during gatherings, her tone casual but her meaning clear. You know, she said during a small group meeting, secrets have a way of revealing themselves, especially the ones we think we've buried. Elijah froze, his breath catching in his throat. Did anyone else notice? He scanned the room, but the others laughed it off, unaware of the deeper meaning. But Elijah wasn't laughing. To him, every word, every glance, every movement felt like a trap waiting to spring. He began to suspect everyone around him. Did Angela know? Did the congregation suspect? Was Naomi talking to someone behind his back? The paranoia consumed him. At night, he checked his phone repeatedly, ensuring no incriminating messages had been missed. He started arriving at church hours early to avoid Naomi and stayed late to fabricate alibis. Even his sermons began to falter. His once commanding voice now wavered, his carefully crafted words lacking conviction. Members of the congregation started to notice. "Elijah seems off lately," one parishioner whispered to another after a Sunday service. "Maybe he's just tired," the other replied. But the doubt lingered, feeding Elijah's fear. For Naomi, the tension only deepened her resolve. She wasn't going to let Elijah brush her aside. Her calls and visits became more frequent, her words more pointed. "You don't get to live your perfect life while I'm left to pick up the pieces," she said during their last conversation. Elijah's response was cold and final. "This needs to end, Naomi, now." But Naomi wasn't ready to end it, not like this. Elijah Davenport had reached his breaking point. The pressure of Naomi's constant demands, her threats to expose their affair, and the risk of losing everything he had built was more than he could bear. Every moment felt like a noose tightening around his neck, and in his desperation, he made a decision that would change his life forever. One evening, after days of avoiding Naomi's calls, Elijah finally reached out. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Let's talk," he said. "Just the two of us. I need to make things right." Naomi, desperate for resolution, agreed without hesitation. They decided to meet at Glenwood Park, a quiet, secluded area on the edge of town. Naomi believed this was the moment Elijah would finally choose her, the moment their future would begin. The park was silent that night, the air thick with humidity. Streetlights cast long shadows on the empty benches and pathways. Naomi arrived first, parking her car near the entrance, and walking to the agreed meeting spot under an old oak tree. She clutched her jacket tightly around her, a mixture of nerves and hope swirling inside her. In her mind, she rehearsed what she would say. She thought about their child, their future, and the promises Elijah had made. Despite everything, she believed there was still a chance for them to be together. As minutes turned into what felt like hours, Naomi's confidence began to waver. She glanced at her phone, checking for a message, but there was nothing. Just as doubt started to creep in, she heard the crunch of footsteps on the gravel path behind her. "Naomi," Elijah called out, his voice low and steady. She turned to see him standing just a few feet away, his face partially obscured by the shadows. Elijah's mind was racing. He had rehearsed what he would say, how he would convince Naomi to stay quiet. But as he stood there, staring at the woman who held his darkest secret, all the words seemed to vanish. Naomi, unaware of the storm brewing inside him, stepped closer. "I'm glad you called," she said softly. "I've been waiting for you to take this seriously." Her tone was calm, but there was an edge of frustration. "We can't keep pretending this doesn't exist. I'm carrying your child, Elijah. You need to make a choice." Elijah clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "I've already made my choice, Naomi. This can't go on." Naomi's expression shifted, her voice rising. "What do you mean it can't go on? You don't just get to walk away from this. From me. From us." The argument escalated quickly. Naomi's voice grew louder as she listed every promise Elijah had made, every lie he had told. She accused him of using her, of stringing her along while he hid behind his perfect family. "You're a coward, Elijah," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You're afraid of the truth, afraid of what people will think. But you can't run from this forever. I'm done being your secret." Elijah's hands trembled as he stepped closer. "You don't understand," he said through gritted teeth. "If this gets out, I lose everything. My family, my position, my life." Naomi didn't back down. "And what about my life? What about my son? What about this baby? You don't get to erase us, Elijah. If you won't do what's right, I'll tell Angela. I'll tell the whole church." Her words hit him like a sledgehammer. In that moment, the fear, the anger, and the desperation that had been building inside him exploded. Without thinking, Elijah lunged at Naomi, with his hands wrapping around her neck. She struggled, her nails clawing at his arms as she gasped for air. "Stop," she choked out, her voice barely audible, but Elijah couldn't stop. His mind was clouded with rage and panic, and the thought of losing everything consumed him. Within moments, Naomi's body went limp. Elijah released his grip, stumbling back as he realized what he had done. Naomi lay motionless on the ground, her once vibrant presence now eerily still. Elijah's heart pounded in his chest as he looked around the empty park. He knew he had to act quickly. He searched Naomi's bag, removing her phone and scattering its contents on the ground. He placed her purse a few feet away, making it look like a robbery gone wrong. He dragged her body into the shadows near the tree, wiping his hands on his shirt as he worked. Every sound, every rustle of leaves, made him jump. He felt like the eyes of the world were on him, even though the park was deserted. When he was finished, Elijah stood there for a moment, staring down at what he had done. His mind was a blur of panic and regret, but he pushed those thoughts aside. He couldn't afford to feel guilty. Not now. As Elijah walked back to his car, his hands trembled on the steering wheel. He glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Naomi's face staring back at him. But the only reflection he saw was his own, a man who had crossed a line he could never uncross. As Elijah drove away, the narrator intones, he thought he had buried the truth, but the cracks in his plan were already beginning to show. The disappearance of Naomi Harris was a shock to the church community. For someone so dependable and engaged, her absence was deeply unsettling. Family and friends quickly raised alarms, but it was Detective Marcus Coleman who saw the case for what it truly was, more than just a missing person. Coleman was no stranger to cases like these. At 50, with decades of experience in law enforcement, he had learned to look beyond the obvious. From the moment Naomi's car was found abandoned at Glenwood Park, he knew something was wrong. Her purse was still there, its contents scattered near the vehicle. But it wasn't the signs of a robbery that caught Coleman's attention. It was the details that didn't add up. The lack of struggle near the car, the precise placement of the items, it all felt too deliberate, too controlled. Detective Coleman began his work by retracing Naomi's final movements. Witnesses from the choir practice confirmed she had been there that evening, leaving shortly after the session ended. But no one saw her after that. The first major clue came from Naomi's phone records. Though her device was missing, the call logs and text history were easily retrieved. Coleman noted a series of messages sent to one number, late at night, often urgent in tone. The number belonged to none other than Elijah Davenport. At first glance, the text seemed innocuous, but as Coleman read further, a different story emerged. Messages like, "We need to talk, and you can't keep ignoring me, Elijah," hinted at tension between Naomi and the deacon. Then there were the voicemails Naomi had left in the days leading up to her disappearance. Coleman listened to them carefully, noting her escalating frustration. In one, she said, "I won't stay silent forever, Elijah. If you won't tell Angela, I will." The mention of Angela, Elijah's wife, immediately stood out. Next, Coleman turned his attention to surveillance footage. The park where Naomi's car was found had limited cameras, but nearby streets and businesses painted a clearer picture. One camera captured Elijah's car entering the park late that night. The timestamp matched the estimated time of Naomi's disappearance. And though Elijah denied being there, the evidence told a different story. The breakthrough came when Coleman and his team conducted a forensic search of Elijah's car. They found faint bloodstains on the passenger side floor mat, stains that had been hastily wiped, but were still detectable under UV light. Forensic analysis confirmed the blood belonged to Naomi Harris. By now, the evidence was piling up. Naomi's text history, the surveillance footage, and the bloodstains painted a damning picture. But Coleman wasn't done. He wanted to know why. As he delved deeper into the dynamics of Naomi's relationships, a pattern of secrecy began to emerge. Conversations with members of the congregation revealed subtle tensions between Naomi and Elijah, things most people hadn't thought much of at the time. One churchgoer recalled an incident during a Bible study meeting where Naomi had made a cryptic remark about secrets. Another mentioned seeing Naomi and Elijah in what seemed like a heated discussion after a service. Piece by piece, Coleman built a timeline of events, one that connected Naomi's disappearance to Elijah's growing desperation. The final piece of the puzzle came when Coleman uncovered a burner phone hidden in Elijah's home. It contained a string of messages between him and Naomi, including one sent hours before her disappearance. "Meet me at the park. We need to figure this out." The evidence was overwhelming. Coleman knew he had his suspect. As the investigation closed in on Elijah, the walls he had so carefully constructed around his secret began to crumble. He had hoped to bury the truth, but the cracks were now impossible to ignore. For Detective Marcus Coleman, the narrator intones, the case was no longer just about finding Naomi. It was about uncovering the full extent of a betrayal that had cost a woman her life. Detective Marcus Coleman had seen many suspects deny the undeniable, but as he prepared to confront Elijah Davenport, he knew this interrogation would be different. The weight of the evidence was too strong, the story too clear. Elijah's carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and all that remained was for Coleman to deliver the final blow. The interrogation room was cold and clinical. Elijah sat at the table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He maintained an outward calm, but Coleman could see the cracks forming. His eyes darted around the room, and his breathing was shallow, betraying his nervousness. Coleman entered, a folder in hand, and sat across from him. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. Then Coleman spoke, his tone measured but firm. "We need to talk about Naomi Harris," he began. "About the messages. About the park. About what really happened that night." Elijah straightened in his chair, his voice steady but defensive. "I don't know what you're talking about. I told you, I wasn't at the park that night." Coleman opened the folder, pulling out photos, images of Naomi's car, the bloodstains in his vehicle, and stills from the surveillance footage. He placed them on the table one by one, each a damning piece of evidence. "Then explain this," Coleman said, sliding the surveillance stills toward him. "Your car was seen entering the park at 10:42 p.m. Naomi's car was already there. She never left. You did." Elijah's jaw tightened. I was just passing through. I didn't stop." Coleman leaned forward, his eyes locking with Elijah's. "The blood in your car says otherwise." For a moment, Elijah said nothing. His hands gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. When he finally spoke, his voice was laced with anger. "She was threatening me," he said, his words coming faster now. "She was trying to ruin my life. She wouldn't stop calling, showing up. She wouldn't leave me alone." Coleman didn't flinch. "So what did you do, Elijah? Did you meet her at the park to talk? To make her stop?" "I didn't mean to." Elijah started, but then stopped himself. He looked away, his eyes fixed on the wall as if searching for a way out. Coleman pressed on, his voice firm but not unkind. "Elijah, this is your chance to tell the truth. We have the texts, the footage, the blood. It's over. You owe her family the truth. You owe Angela the truth." Elijah's composure broke. His head dropped into his hands and his shoulders shook as he let out a long, shuddering breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to do it," he muttered. "I just wanted to make it stop. She kept saying she would tell Angela, the church. She wouldn't stop." Coleman let the confession sink in before asking the next question. "What happened at the park, Elijah?" Elijah's words came haltingly, as if each one carried the weight of his guilt. "We argued. She wouldn't listen. She said she was going to ruin everything. I lost control." "And then?" Coleman prompted. Elijah's voice broke. He shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted her to stop." Coleman leaned back in his chair, watching as the man before him unraveled completely. It was a confession he had heard countless times, a moment of rage, a life destroyed. But no amount of repetition could dull the tragedy of it. The room fell silent again, save for Elijah's quiet sobs. Coleman stood, gathering the evidence from the table. He had what he needed. As he left the room, his parting words lingered in the air. "You didn't just end her life, Elijah. You ended your own." The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Elijah Davenport, once a respected deacon and a cornerstone of his community, was found guilty of murder. The sentence was clear: life in prison without the possibility of parole. The man who had stood at the pulpit, delivering sermons on faith and integrity, would now spend the rest of his days behind bars, his legacy forever tarnished. Angela Davenport sat in the gallery, her face stoic but her hands trembling. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted with her life, was now a stranger to her. a stranger who had betrayed her in the most devastating way. Within days of the trial's conclusion, Angela filed for divorce. She packed her belongings, left the home they had shared, and moved away, determined to rebuild her life far from the shadows of betrayal. For Naomi Harris's family, the pain was immeasurable. Her teenage son, now orphaned, was taken in by relatives. The boy, once full of hope and joy, now carried the burden of losing his mother in such a tragic and public way. Friends and neighbors rallied around him, offering support, but the scars of this loss would remain with him forever. The impact of Elijah's actions rippled far beyond his immediate family. The church, once a place of unity and trust, became a site of reflection and soul-searching. Congregants struggled to reconcile the man they had admired with the monster his actions revealed. Church leaders vowed to implement better safeguards to protect their community. Workshops on accountability and the abuse of power were introduced, aimed at preventing similar betrayals in the future. Yet the pain of Elijah's actions lingered, a reminder of how quickly trust could be shattered. In the end, the truth always finds its way to the surface. Secrets may buy time, but they cannot buy peace. Elijah Davenport learned this too late, but for those of us watching, it serves as a stark reminder to cherish the trust we hold and to act with integrity, no matter the cost. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories of crime, betrayal, and justice. Your support helps us bring you more in-depth stories like this one. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.